I keep a ledger. I've kept one since I was 19 years old and rode out of Bixar County with a cavalry commission and nothing else to my name. The habit was the Army's, but the Army gave it to me young enough that it became mine. Every horse, every man, every rifle, every pound of cornmeal entered in columns, carried forward balanced. A soldier who cannot account for his resources at night is a soldier who loses something in the morning that he cannot get back. I understood that at 19. I understand it still. The ledger I keep now sits on the kitchen table of the Vaz homestead, Caldwell County, New Mexico Territory. It is thick, and the pages have warped a little from 15 years of weather moving through the house. The ink in the early columns is faded. The later columns are clear and dark and easy to read. If you opened it today, you would find accounts of cattle and acreage and fence line and water, same as any ranching ledger in the territory. You would find a column for repairs, a column for wages, a column for what we put by against a hard winter. What you would not find, what does not fit in any column I have ever been able to draw, is how Miriam Hale walked into the Hearns Crossing Courthouse on the 14th of March, 1881, sat down across the table from me, folded her hands, and changed every account I thought I had settled. I am going to try to write it down anyway. I had been back from the 9th for 6 weeks when I met her the first time. The land grant had come through, 2,200 acres in Caldwell County, contingent on a list of conditions I will not bore you with except to say that one of them was that the claimant be a married man in good standing. The territorial government of 1881 had its notions about what kind of man built permanent settlements and what kind of man drifted. A married man, they reasoned, had an anchor. I had no argument with the reasoning. I had been anchored to the Army for 15 years. I understood the value of a fixed point. The problem was that my first wife, Helena, had died of a camp fever in the summer of 1876. She was buried in a military cemetery in southern Arizona. I had stood at the graveside in my dress uniform and filed the paperwork and then gotten back on my horse because there was nothing else to do and nowhere else to be. Helena and I had been practical about the marriage from the beginning. We were not cold people, but we were soldiers' spouses, which meant we were people who had learned to hold things at a distance so that losing them did not hollow you out entirely. I think we both understood that. I think in her quieter moments she may have been sad about it. I was too organized to let myself feel it either way. So, 6 weeks out of the Army, 2,200 acres in Caldwell County, and a condition in the land grant that required a wife. I had put it in the ledger, spouse, required, source, unresolved. I had underlined it twice. The second time I met Miriam Hale was in the Hearns Crossing Courthouse, Territorial Records Office, on a Thursday morning in mid-March. I was there to file the first round of grant paperwork. She was there, I would learn this later, to check the status of a property claim that her late husband's uncle, a man named Cyrus Steen, had filed against the house and land her husband had left her in Hearns Crossing proper. We were placed at the same table because the records office had 2 chairs and 1 table, and that was all. The territorial government of 1881 was not lavish with its furniture. She sat down across from me and put a folded document on the table and said, without preliminary, "I understand you need a wife." I put down my pen. She was not what I had expected, which tells you something about how little I had thought about what I expected. She was in her middle 30s, dressed well but plainly in a dark traveling dress that had been carefully pressed and showed some wear at the cuffs. Brown hair pinned up correctly, a face that was composed in the way that a document is composed, every element in its proper place, nothing extraneous. Her eyes were gray or something near gray, and they looked at me the way you look at a map, for information, not for sentiment. "I heard about the grant," she said. "The condition, Hearns Crossing is a small town." "It is," I said. "My situation is this." She unfolded the document and placed it in front of me. It was the claim filing from Cyrus Steen. "My husband died 14 months ago. His uncle, who disliked the marriage and said so publicly for 11 years, has filed a competing claim to this property on the grounds that the original deed was improperly drawn. He is, in fact, incorrect. The deed was properly drawn, and I have 3 attorneys who will say so. But a territorial property dispute can take 2 years to resolve, and during that time Steen's lawyers can make my life very difficult. She paused. A married woman's property is her husband's in law, but a married woman whose husband is a man of standing, a military officer, for instance, with a recorded land grant and a history of service, is in a considerably different position than a widow living alone. Steen's lawyers have less room to maneuver. The claim becomes harder to sustain. I looked at the document. It was filed correctly, and the argument in it was thin but not frivolous. A good lawyer could tie up the Hearns crossing property for 18 months at minimum. "You are proposing a legal marriage," I said. "I am proposing a legal marriage," she said. "You get the spouse the grant requires. I get a husband whose standing complicates Steen's claim enough that his lawyers likely advise him to abandon it. The arrangement is practical, transparent, and we would both enter it with clear eyes. And when Steen's claim is resolved." She looked at me steadily. "The arrangement can be whatever we both determine it to be at that point. I am not proposing anything that either of us cannot revisit when the circumstances change." I picked up my pen. I put it down again. I had been in the Army for 15 years. I had negotiated supply contracts in field conditions, coordinated the transfer of 200 horses across a river in flood, managed disputes between officers who despised each other and needed to function together for the survival of the men under them. I knew a clear-eyed proposal when one was in front of me. "What did your husband do?" I said. "He was a surveyor. He was a good man, and I am sorry he is gone. He was not a man who knew how to fight a territorial property dispute, which is why he did not put better language in the deed, which is why we are here." She said this without bitterness, the way you state a fact in a ledger. "Children?" "None." She said it without flinching, but something in her face closed briefly, like a window being shut. "None living." I noted this and did not press it. The homestead on the grant is rough. The house wants work. I would not be able to offer you the kind of establishment you have in town. "I have managed rough conditions before," she said, "and I am not asking to relocate. I am asking for a name on a document." That was not ultimately how it worked out, but I did not know that yet. "All right," I said. She extended her hand across the table as if we had concluded a business negotiation, which we had. I shook it. Her grip was firm and dry, and she did not look away. We were married that afternoon in the courthouse before the Justice of the Peace, with the records clerk and a woman who was waiting to file a homestead claim of her own serving as witnesses. The ceremony took 11 minutes. Miriam signed her name in clear, upright letters. I signed mine. The Justice of the Peace said, "I now pronounce you man and wife," and both of us looked at the document rather than at each other. We walked out into the March wind, which was cold off the plateau and smelled of dust and coming rain. She had a horse at the post. "I will need to go to the homestead," she said. "I should see what I am dealing with." "I can take you out tomorrow," I said. "Today would be better," she said. "I have an appointment with my solicitor in the morning." We rode out to the Vaz land that afternoon. I showed her the house, a solid adobe structure, 2 rooms and a Linta kitchen, which was more than I had started with in the Army, but less than a woman who had kept a proper house in Hearns Crossing would consider adequate. The roof wanted patching. The kitchen hearth needed a new lintel. There was no garden to speak of, only a kitchen garden gone to scrub, and the water came from a creek 20 yards east that was reliable in most seasons. She walked through both rooms without comment. In the Linta kitchen, she stopped and looked at the hearth and said, "The lintel is cracked. That will need replacing before you can use this safely." "Yes," I said. "And the south-facing window in the main room has lost most of its putty. Water will come in before summer. Yes. She turned around. It is a good house. The walls are thick. It will be warm in winter. I had not thought of it in those terms. I said so. My husband's surveying kept us in the field more often than in town, she said. I have lived in worse. She was already at the door of the lean-to, assessing the roof line. I will bring what I need from town. You will want to let me know what provisions you have so I do not duplicate. I have flour, coffee, dried beans, a side of salt pork and a quantity of cornmeal, I said. I have not yet had time to establish a proper larder. I will bring butter, dried apples, and a good knife, she said. Yours, I imagine, is adequate for a soldier and not adequate for a kitchen. She was right. My knife had skinned rabbits in the field and it was not adequate for a kitchen. I did not say so. She could already tell. That was the 14th of March, 1881. That was the first week. The thing about a practical arrangement is that practicality is not the same as simplicity. Miriam had not said she would stay at the homestead. But the next day, after her solicitor's appointment, she came back with 2 saddlebags, a canvas roll, and a crate of provisions that included the butter, the dried apples, the good knife, a length of printed calico, and a copy of Gray's Anatomy that she set on the shelf in the main room without explanation. Your solicitor, I said, advised patience and a stable address, she said. I am taking his advice. She began unpacking the crate. Is there a second bedroom? The main room has 2 cots, I said. I can move one into the lean-to kitchen. That will do, she said. So we established ourselves. She took the cot in the lean-to kitchen, which she curtained off with the calico. I remained in the main room. We divided the practical matters with the same efficiency we had brought to the courthouse. She managed the provisions and the kitchen and the garden. I managed the stock and the fence line and the accounts. We ate at the same table twice a day, breakfast and supper, and we did not talk much at first because we were each of us assessing the other the way you assess new terrain, carefully, without committing to an interpretation until you have more information. I noted the following in those first weeks. She rose before me. When I came out in the morning, the coffee was already on, and she was at the kitchen table with a book or a letter she was composing. She did not ask for conversation at that hour, and neither did I, and this was the first thing I put in what I will call, for lack of a better term, the informal ledger. The one I kept in my head, the one that had no columns. She did not complain, not about the wind which came off the plateau in the afternoons with real force, not about the dust which was a constant presence in late March and April, not about the condition of the house or the kitchen or the creek water which ran brown for a week after a rain. She noted these things in the same way she had noted the cracked lintel, as facts that required responses, not grievances that required acknowledgement. I respected this, though I did not say so. She worked hard and she worked quietly. The kitchen garden was replanted within a fortnight. The calico curtain went up. The south window was reglazed. She watched me do the glazing and then told me where I had left a gap, and she was right, and I filled it without comment. The larder grew. The house began, by degrees, to smell like something other than an empty building. In the evenings she read. She had brought 4 books from Hearn's Crossing in addition to the anatomy, and she went through them steadily. Once, about 3 weeks in, she read something that made her laugh, a short, surprised sound, quickly contained. I was at the table with the accounts. I did not look up, but I noted it. These are the kinds of things you note when you have been a soldier for 15 years, and you have learned that the things that matter announce themselves quietly. Hearn's Crossing had opinions about us, of course. Small territorial towns always do. The general opinion, as relayed to me by the man I bought feed from, was that Captain Vaz had been talked into a marriage of convenience by a woman who was sharper than she appeared, and that either I would regret it or I wouldn't, and that the betting was roughly even. I found I did not care what Hearn's Crossing thought, which was itself a change. because a military officer's career depends substantially on what the relevant people think of him, and I had spent 15 years being very careful about it. Miriam, for her part, appeared not to know or care that the town had opinions. When she came in for provisions, she was courteous and businesslike and did not discuss our arrangement with anyone. When women at the general store made the kinds of inquiries that are technically social but are actually investigative, she answered what she felt like answering and moved on. I heard about this secondhand and thought, there it is. That is the surveyor's wife who lived in the field. We had been at the homestead 5 weeks when the first real event occurred. I am going to call it that, an event, because calling it what it was would require me to use language I am not accustomed to putting in a ledger. It was an April evening. A line storm had come in from the west around 4 in the afternoon, the kind that doesn't announce itself properly. The sky goes yellow, and then the wind hits, and then there is no space between the lightning and the thunder at all. I had gotten the horses into the lean-to shelter on the north side of the barn, and latched everything I could and come inside just as the rain started in earnest. Miriam was in the kitchen. The storm was loud enough that you did not speak through it, only listened to it. I sat at the table with the lamp turned low to save oil, and she stood at the kitchen window watching the rain sheet across the yard. After a while she came and sat at the table with me, not across from me, at the same end, which was new. She put her hands around a cup of coffee she had poured and did not say anything. The lightning was very close. In the flashes you could see the yard lit white and the horses moving in the shelter and the creek already swollen and running brown and fast. After a while she said, "My husband was afraid of lightning." I said I didn't know. "Most people didn't," she said. "He was very capable in almost every circumstance, but lightning undid him. He would go very white and very still and not speak, and afterward he would be exhausted as if he had been working all day." She turned the cup in her hands. "I used to sit with him, just be there. It seemed to help." The thunder came, very close, and then the trailing echo of it, and then the rain again. "He sounds like a good man," I said. "He was," she said. "He was not easy to live with, he could be distant, and he was better with instruments than with people. But he was honest and he tried hard." She looked at the window. "You would have liked him, I think. You have some of the same qualities." I considered this, better with instruments than with people. "Honest," she said, "and trying hard." I looked at my coffee. The storm eased slightly and then came back and then eased again. We sat there for a long time. I cannot tell you exactly when the evening changed in quality, but it did. At some point, the storm was just weather, and we were just two people sitting at the same end of a table in a lamplit room, and the silence between us was not the silence of strangers but something different, something that had a temperature. I did not say anything about it. Neither did she. After a while she said good night and went behind her calico curtain, and I sat at the table for another hour looking at the accounts. The storm total damage, 1 fence post down, the creek up by 3 feet, no loss of stock. I wrote it in the ledger. Under it, in the informal one, I wrote, "Something shifted tonight. Cannot assign it a column." May came in dry and bright. The cattle were doing well. The kitchen garden had lettuce and early turnips. The fence line was in better condition than it had been since I filed the grant. Miriam's solicitor wrote twice in May. The second letter, which she showed me without comment, indicated that Cyrus Steen had hired a better lawyer and was pressing the claim more aggressively. The new lawyer had filed a supplementary argument contesting the chain of title on the Hearns Crossing property going back 12 years. It was, her solicitor noted, a nuisance suit dressed in legal language. But nuisance suits in territorial courts had a way of running long if the opposing party had money and determination, and Cyrus Steen had both. "He is going to drag it out," she said. She was at the kitchen table. I was at the main room table. We had taken to having this kind of conversation through the doorway, which I noted was a degree of casualness that had not been present in March. How long does your solicitor estimate? I said. He says best case, resolution in 8 months. Worst case, 2 years, possibly longer if Steen appeals. And the property, is it generating income you could live on in the meantime? I have tenants, she said. A seamstress and her daughter, they pay quarterly. It is enough for expenses but not comfortable. I looked at my ledger. The Vaz homestead was, by that point, running at a modest profit. Not a large one. The cattle market was uncertain and the land was still establishing itself, but the numbers were improving. You can stay here, I said, for however long the suit runs. The arrangement costs me nothing, and the work you have put into this place is worth accounting for. She was quiet for a moment. I am not a charity case, Captain. I know that, I said. I am making an accounting argument. You have added value to this property. That is a fact in a ledger. It has nothing to do with charity. Another pause. All right, she said. That was the agreement. We wrote nothing down. We had not written much down after the original courthouse document, but I put it in the informal ledger. She will stay. She has added value. Both statements are correct and neither one is the whole of it. June was the month I understood that I was in trouble. I will describe the specific moment, because a man who keeps ledgers believes in specific moments. It was a Tuesday evening in the second week of June. The days were long and bright, and the heat came in the afternoons and eased towards sunset into something bearable. After supper, Miriam had taken out the ledger, my main ledger, the one on the kitchen table, and was going through the June accounts, because she had started doing the accounts. Not taken them over, started doing them alongside me, because in late April she had looked over my shoulder one evening and pointed out that I had entered the same fence repair expense twice, and from then on she reviewed the figures before I closed the book for the night. She was reading the column aloud, which she did when she was concentrating, a quiet murmur, each entry in order. Wire 6 spools, cornmeal 20 pounds, horseshoe nails 1 pound, salt 5 pounds. The lamp was burning low and the window was open to the evening air, and somewhere outside a nighthawk was going. I was at the main room table with a letter from the land office that wanted answering. I was not looking at the ledger. I was looking at the letter, but I could hear her voice through the doorway, the low, steady murmur of the entries, the occasional pause, the sound of the pen making a note. It had been going on for perhaps an hour. I was not reading the letter from the land office. I had stopped reading it some time before. I was sitting at the table in the main room listening to my wife read figures from a ledger in the next room, and I had been doing so, without noticing, for an hour, and the sound of her voice was, "There is no column for this," the sound of the house being inhabited, the sound of something that had been hollow filling up. I put the land office letter down. I looked at my hands. I had organized my heart into compartments. That was what I had done after Helena built the compartments carefully, one for each thing that mattered, sized correctly, nothing overflowing into the adjacent space. 15 years of cavalry service is good training for this. You learn to put things where they belong and keep them there. It is a function of survival. What I understood in that moment, listening to Miriam read the entries in the June ledger, was that one of the compartments had failed. Something had overflowed. It had been overflowing quietly since the April storm, or possibly since before that. Since the morning I had noticed that the coffee was already on. Since the afternoon she had found the gap in the glazing. Since she had said he was honest, and he tried hard and looked at me with those gray eyes that read everything like a map. I picked up the land office letter. I sat with it until she finished the entries and said good night. Then I wrote the letter, which took 40 minutes and should have taken 15. Then I sat at the table for a while looking at the lamp. In the informal ledger, you are in trouble, Reuben. Itemize the loss when you know the full extent of it. I did not say anything. This was not courage. It was the opposite. I told myself it was reason, that our arrangement had terms, that she had entered it with clear eyes and practical purposes, that I had no right to introduce complications she had not contracted for. All of this was correct, and none of it was the real reason. The real reason was that I was afraid, which was not a condition I had much experience with, and the specific thing I was afraid of was that she would look at me with those map-reading eyes and decide that the accounting did not work out in my favor. She noticed the change, of course. She noticed most things. "You are quieter than usual," she said, one morning in mid-June over coffee. "I have a good deal on my mind," I said. "The land office letter." "Partly." She looked at me for a moment. She did not press it, but that evening when she was doing the accounts, she called through the doorway. "The south fence repair is going to cost more than you estimated. The post rot goes further than it looked." "How much further?" 60 feet, possibly more. I walked it this afternoon." I came to the doorway. She was at the table with the ledger open and a rough sketch of the south fence line she had drawn on a separate piece of paper. She had walked 60 feet of fence line and mapped the rot damage and brought it back to the table as a sketch. I looked at the sketch. She had measured it in paces and estimated in feet, with a note that the estimate should be confirmed, but was likely accurate to within 5 feet. "You surveyed this," I said. "My husband taught me," she said. "It was useful in the field." She looked at the sketch. "You will want to get the lumber ordered before August. The dry season makes the hauling easier." I stood in the doorway looking at the sketch and at the open ledger and at her hands, ink-stained, capable at rest on the table, and I thought, this is the whole of it. This is what overflowed the compartment. This specific woman at this specific table in this specific house that was empty before she came into it. "All right," I said. "I will order it this week." I ordered the lumber. I did not say anything else. July was when Cyrus Steen came. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in the 3rd week of July. He had hired a driver and come out in a spring wagon, which told me he had money to spend on comfort, and he had brought his lawyer with him, a thin man from Santa Fe named Aldridge, who had the look of a man accustomed to winning arguments by exhaustion rather than by merit. I was at the barn when they came in. I watched them pull up to the house from a distance, and I crossed the yard at a pace that was not hurried and was not slow. Miriam was on the porch. She had come out when she heard the wagon and was standing at the top of the porch steps with her arms at her sides and her face composed. I knew, by then, what that composure cost her. The woman I had come to know over 4 months did not like Cyrus Steen and was not comfortable being in the same county with him, and what showed on her face was not what she was feeling, which was considerable, but what she had decided to show, which was very little. I came up beside her. Steen got out of the wagon. He was a broad man in his 60s with a gray beard and the settled confidence of a man who had gotten what he wanted for a long time and saw no reason this occasion would be different. He looked at me first, then at Miriam, then back at me. "Captain Vaz," he said. "Mr. Steen," I said. He was assessing the setup. The house, the repaired fence visible to the south, the garden, the quality of the stock in the corral. Assessing me and Miriam, and whether what he had filed had a chance of holding given what he was looking at. "I have come to discuss the matter of my nephew's property," he said. "My wife's property," I said. He did not like this. Not the statement, the ease of it. He was a man who had expected, I think, to find a woman alone in a dispute she did not have the standing to win, and what he had found instead was a captain of cavalry standing on a porch beside her on a homestead with a recorded land grant and a $200 timber order sitting on the kitchen table. Aldridge said, in the manner of a man who has prepared his remarks, "The claim rests on." "I know what the claim rests on," I said. "Your filing is on record and my wife's solicitor has the response in hand. If you have new documentation, he is the appropriate party." We thought a conversation. There is nothing to discuss in person, I said. This is private property. The legal dispute is a matter for the courts and for counsel. Steen looked at Miriam. He had a particular look, the look of a man who had managed a woman through condescension for a long time and expected it to keep working. Miriam, he said, this can be resolved quietly. Thomas would not have wanted. Thomas would have wanted me to keep the house, she said. Her voice was level and clear. He told me so specifically, and it is in his will, which is in the record. Good afternoon, Mr. Steen. Steen looked at me. I met his eyes and did not move. He made, I thought, a rapid internal calculation, the kind a man makes when he is deciding whether the cost of pressing forward is worth what he stands to gain. I had made similar calculations in the field. Sometimes you press and sometimes you recognize that the ground has changed, and what you thought was a weak position is not weak anymore. Steen was not, whatever else he was, a stupid man. He got back in the wagon. Aldrich followed, tucking his papers under his arm. The wagon turned and went back down the track. Miriam and I stood on the porch until it was out of sight. Then she exhaled a long, controlled breath, like a horse settling after a hard run. "Thank you," she said. "Nothing to thank me for," I said. That was a legal and factual statement of the situation. "I know," she said. "That is what made it useful." She looked down the track where the wagon had gone. "He will not stop because of one conversation." "No," I said, "but he has had a look at the ground. The ground is not what he thought it was." She was quiet for a moment. "When I proposed this arrangement," she said, I accounted for the legal function and the practical arrangements and the cost to you in terms of time and the use of the homestead. I did not account for what it would cost you to stand on a porch in July and tell a man like that to take his lawyer and go." "It cost me nothing," I said. "It could have cost you quite a lot," she said. "Steen is connected in the territory. He has friends in the land office, a man in your position." "My position is that I have a legitimate grant, a sound record of service, and nothing to apologize for," I said. "A man like Steen depends on the people he is dealing with believing they are in a weaker position than they are. I have spent 15 years telling troops who were in genuinely dangerous situations that the ground is not as bad as it looks. I am not going to extend Cyrus Steen a courtesy I would not extend to an enemy with real guns." She looked at me, the gray eyes reading the map. "You are not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" She thought about this, genuinely thought about it, the way she thought about everything, from the front and then the side and then straight on. "Someone who would hold up his end of the arrangement," she said. "Correctly and without complaint. I expected competence. I did not expect—" She stopped. "What?" I said. "I did not expect you to be angry," she said. "On my behalf, I could see it. You were angry." I had been. I had not named it at the time, but it had been there, something in me that had gone very still and very cold when Steen had looked at Miriam with that managing look. Not on behalf of a woman in a legal arrangement. On behalf of this specific woman, on this specific porch, in this specific house. "The anger was appropriate to the situation," I said. "Yes," she said. She was still looking at me. "That is what I mean." We stood on the porch for another moment. The afternoon was very bright. The south fence was visible from where I was standing, the new posts going in where the old ones had rotted, the lumber stacked and waiting. The kitchen garden was full and green. The house behind us was warm with the smell of the supper she had left on the hearth. She went inside. I stood on the porch for a while longer, looking at the homestead in the late July sun, and I thought about the compartments. August was hot and dry and close, the way the New Mexico territory gets in the deep summer when the afternoon clouds build and threaten and mostly don't deliver. I finished the south fence. The cattle were moving well. The kitchen garden was producing more than we could eat, and Miriam put up preserves, a skill she had, she told me, from a grandmother in Ohio. and the pantry shelves filled with jars that caught the light in the mornings when I came through to get coffee. We fell into something in August that I will call a habit, but that was more than a habit. We fell into the shape of the thing, which is not the same as the thing but is adjacent to it and often precedes it. In the evenings we sat on the porch. The heat broke towards sunset and the air from the plateau came in cool and smelling of sage, and the horses settled in the corral, and it was, in the simple physical sense, a good place to be at the end of a day. We talked more in August than we had in any previous month. Not about the arrangement or Steen or the solicitor's letters, about other things. About the army, about surveying, about a book she had read and wanted to argue about the west face of the mesa that turned violet at dusk for about 20 minutes if the light was right. She argued about the book, something about natural philosophy, with a precision that kept me honest, because she read everything as a document and did not accept vague assertions. And I was not in the habit of offering them, but I pushed myself to be more exact with her than I usually was with anyone, because imprecision annoyed her in the way that a gap in glazing annoyed her, fixable, and therefore without excuse. I liked arguing with her, I noted this. Her solicitor wrote in early August. Steen's lawyer had filed a motion that her solicitor described as optimistic and unlikely to succeed, but worth taking seriously. The suit was not resolved. It might not be resolved until the following spring. She showed me the letter and I read it and we discussed it, and she filed it with the other letters in the box she kept for correspondence. You do not have to stay, I said. The arrangement, if the homestead is not what you need. The homestead is exactly what I need, she said. Stable address, working property, evidence of settled circumstances. She looked at the letter in the box. My solicitor is in a better position than he was in March because I am in a better position. That is worth something. Yes, I said. And the preserves will not put themselves up, she said, which was not a joke exactly but was something near one, which was new. She had a dry humor that came out occasionally, mainly in the evenings, mainly when she was not thinking about being composed. I went back to the porch. I did not say anything about the preserves. In the informal ledger, which was filling up, she said the homestead is exactly what she needs. She did not say the arrangement is what she needs. Note the distinction. September brought rain, real rain. Not the line storms that blow through and leave the ground dry, but 3 weeks of steady, soaking rain that filled the creek and greened the range and made the south fence grateful for the new posts. The cattle put on weight. The kitchen garden went late into the season. In September, she taught me to put up preserves. This was her doing, not mine. I had come into the kitchen one morning, and she was midway through a batch of apple preserves, and was short a hand for holding the jar while she ladled. And rather than stop, she showed me what to hold and how to hold it. And we did 4 jars before she pointed out that I had been standing at the wrong angle for my height and would have a sore back by afternoon. And she moved me to the right position with the pragmatic certainty she brought to everything, and we finished the batch. I had a sore back by afternoon because I had been at the wrong angle for the first 2 jars. I did not mention it. The thing about putting up preserves, which I recorded in the informal ledger but could not have predicted from the outside, is that it puts 2 people in a small kitchen doing a thing that requires coordination and attention and occasional adjustment, and in the course of this they occupy the same space and speak in a practical shorthand and are, without arranging, to be close. Not in any way that could be put in a document. Just close. Elbows nearly touching over a jar. Her voice at my left ear saying tilt it. More. There, and my hands following the instruction because the instruction was correct. I put up preserves twice more in September. The second time she laughed when I got the angle wrong again. The full laugh this time, not the short contained one from May. It was a good laugh. It was a laugh that required a real chest to produce it. I got the angle right on the 3rd batch. She noted this. October brought Steen's second visit, and this one was different. He came alone. No lawyer, no spring wagon, he came on a good horse in the early afternoon, and when I came out of the barn he was at the gate, not the porch, which meant he was not planning to stay. He looked older than he had in July. Not smaller, he was not the kind of man who got smaller, but older, in the way men get who have been spending money on a fight they are beginning to think they will lose. "Captain," he said. "Mr. Steen." He looked at the house. The preserves were behind glass on the pantry shelves, and he could not see them from the gate, but he could see the patched lintel and the new south fence posts, and the kitchen garden still producing in October, and the smoke from the hearth where supper was on. "My lawyer believes the motion will fail," he said. "I expect your lawyer is correct," I said. "Thomas was my nephew," he said. "We had our disagreements, but he was blood." "I know that," I said. "Your quarrel was never with me." "No," he said. He was quiet for a moment. A line of geese went over heading south and we both looked up. "Miriam," he said, is she well?" The question surprised me. The anger came briefly and then settled, because what was in his face when he asked it was not the managing look from July. It was something older and less comfortable than that. It was the look of a man who had made a decision that could not be unmade, and was beginning to wonder whether he had made it for the reasons he had told himself. "She is well," I said. He looked at the house for another moment. "My lawyer will file the withdrawal by end of month," he said. "You will receive documentation." He turned his horse and rode back down the track. I stood at the gate and watched him go. Then I went to the porch and sat down and stayed there for a while. Miriam came out after a few minutes. She had heard the horse and waited. She stood at the porch rail and looked down the empty track. "He came to tell you personally," she said. "He did." "That is," she stopped. "I did not expect that of him." "Men surprise you," I said. "Usually in the bad direction, occasionally in the other one." She sat down in the other chair. We sat on the porch together, and the afternoon light moved across the yard, and the horses moved in the corral, and the creek ran clear over its stones in the dry October air. "The claim will be withdrawn," she said. "By end of month," I said. "You will want to let your solicitor know." "Yes," she was quiet. "So the arrangement," she stopped again. "The arrangement," I said, "has a clause that says we revisit it when the circumstances change." "Yes," she said. "The circumstances have changed." She looked at her hands. She had taken off her work gloves and left them on the porch rail, and her hands were bare, ink-stained at the right index finger, a small scar on the left palm from a surveying accident she had mentioned once. Capable hands. The hands of a woman who held her end of things and always had. "I have been thinking about that," she said. "So have I said. She looked up, the gray eyes reading. "And," she said, "I had rehearsed something, in the way you rehearse a dispatch, clear language, factual, no excess. I had the language ready. What came out was not the dispatch. The land grant does not require a spouse any longer," I said. "The filing period is past and the grant is secured. You entered this arrangement with a specific purpose, and that purpose has been achieved. You are free to go. I want you to know that clearly." She said nothing. "And I want you to know," I said, "that the house is—" I stopped. I looked at the porch rail, the work gloves, the paint she had put on the post in August when she noticed it was weathering badly. "The house is not what it was in March." "No," she said, "it isn't." "Neither am I said. She was very still. "I am not in the habit of saying things I cannot put in a column," I said. "I have spent most of my adult life putting things in columns because it is accurate and it is clear and it does not require you to say the rest of it out loud and have someone tell you that the accounting does not work." I stopped. I looked at her. "I am saying it now. The accounting works, in my opinion, and has for some time. But I am aware that I am not the only party to this arrangement. I am asking you, not as a term of the arrangement, not as a legal requirement, Not because the homestead needs a working set of hands or because Steen might come back. I am asking you whether you want to stay. The afternoon was very quiet. A hawk turned overhead, high and slow. Miriam looked at the hawk for a moment. Then she looked at me. You entered the columns in the wrong order, she said. Did I? You said the house is not what it was, and then you said neither are you, she said. The second statement is the more important one, and it should come first. Something eased in me. Something that had been in the wrong position, not unlike a certain fence post angle, corrected. You are right, I said. I am frequently right, she said. You have had 6 months to notice. I have noticed, I said. She was quiet for another moment. The hawk was gone. The evening was coming in off the plateau, cool and sage-scented, and the first stars were beginning in the east. I want to stay, she said. The claim withdrawal came through on the last day of October. Her solicitor filed the confirmation by the first week of November, and the Hearns Crossing property was fully and unambiguously hers. She kept the tenants, the seamstress and her daughter, and they stayed on at a fair rent that covered the property taxes and a little more. We did not have a second ceremony. There was nothing to repeat. The ceremony in the courthouse had been legal and binding, and 11 minutes long, and I had no complaints about it. And when I said this to Miriam, she said the 11 minutes had been efficient, and she saw no reason to be less efficient the second time. So we were not less efficient. We were practical, which was what we had always been, and underneath the practicality, which was real and which I did not want to diminish, was the other thing, which was also real, and which did not fit in any column I had ever been able to draw. The house by November was warm and well provisioned and smelled of wood smoke, and the last of the apple preserves, and the leather of her work gloves drying by the hearth. The ledger on the kitchen table had her handwriting in the September and October columns, neat and precise and correct. The south fence was sound. The cattle were well wintered. The creek ran clear. I kept the informal ledger. I still keep it. It is, as I have said, the one with no columns, the one where things overflow into the adjacent space without permission. In the entry for November 1881 I wrote, "She stays. The house is inhabited. The accounting works. These are facts. They are also not the whole of it. The whole of it is that she is at the table in the lamplight, and the sound of her voice going through the entries is the sound of something that was hollow being full." And then I could not think of anything to add, which is rare for me, and I took it as a sign that the entry was complete. I am writing this on the porch of the Vaz homestead in the autumn of 1896, 15 years since March 1881. The ledger on the kitchen table is the fourth one. The previous 3 are on the shelf in the main room next to the anatomy, and 6 other books that were hers and are now ours. The south fence has been repaired twice more since the original rebuild. The kitchen garden is larger than it was. She expanded it in 1884 and again in 1887 and again last spring. And it is now a proper kitchen garden that produces more than we can use. And so we give what we do not put up to the family that works the north pasture. The homestead runs well. I could give you the figures. I always have the figures, but they are not the point of what I am trying to write down. The point is this. A man who keeps ledgers will tell you that an accounting is complete when every entry balances and every column sums to the correct total. He will tell you that the purpose of the ledger is precision, to know, at any given moment, exactly what he has and what he owes and what remains unresolved. What I understand now, 15 years after a courthouse table and a gray-eyed woman who put her hands flat and proposed a practical arrangement, is that there is a category of things that do not balance in columns and cannot be summed to a total because they do not decrease. You put them in the informal ledger and they stay there unchanged, not because nothing has changed, but because the entry was correct from the beginning and remains correct, and you keep making it because There is no closing balance on a thing that is still ongoing. She is inside at the table with the new ledger. I can hear her through the window, the low murmur of entries, the pause, the scratch of the pen. The evening is coming in off the plateau. The sage smell. The first stars in the east. I have been sitting on this porch listening to her voice for a quarter of an hour, same as the first time in June, same as every time since. And the entry in the informal ledger is the same as it has always been. The house is inhabited. Something that was hollow is full. She stays. That is the whole of the accounting. I am satisfied that it is correct.